Welcome to HFY Beyond Terra, where humanity doesn't just survive, it becomes the galaxy's biggest surprise. Subscribe, and let's go beyond Terra.
The dish bearers silenced the air inside the hall of 10,000 scales tasted like copper and perfumed resin. It always did when the Queen of Riss sat in judgment, as if the chamber itself exhaled a reminder that every breath was borrowed from her patience. Cade Rourke kept his hands clasped behind his back and tried not to stare. Everyone else stared. Not at the Queen, not directly. That would be vulgar. They stared at the space around her, at the silk banners falling like waterfalls from the ceiling ribs, at the black obsidian dais with its inlaid rivers of pearl, at the guards with spears that shimmered and hummed in a frequency that made Cade's molars itch. They stared at everything except the one fact they all served: power. Queen Sorin of Riss was seated with the stillness of a carved statue. Her crown was not metal but living crystal, grown to fit the ridges of her skull. Her eyes, two of them, at least the two Cade could see, were pale as moonlit ice fixed on the kneeling petitioners below. Her attendants moved as shadows. Her advisors stood as pillars. And Cade, the only human in the hall, stood where the foreign liaison always stood, 3 steps back from the lowest tier of nobility, 1 step forward of the servants. Close enough to be watched, far enough to be disposable. He'd been told, repeatedly and politely, that his role was symbolic. That the Rishan court valued presence. That a human observer soothed the border worlds and impressed the trade houses and reminded the Queen that the wider galaxy was listening. Symbolic people, Cade had learned, were allowed to witness history as long as they didn't touch it. He had no intention of touching anything, not unless it tried to touch her. The petitioners finished. A low chime announced the close of the judicial segment, and the hall's mood shifted the way weather shifts before a storm. People straightened. The guards re-angled their spears. A line of servants emerged through the side arch, each bearing a lacquered tray. The Queen's evening sustenance. Cade's spine tightened. Food in a court like this was never just food, it was loyalty rendered edible. It was the culmination of inspections, approvals, and oaths. It was the part of governance that made every lower house remember they could be fed or starved by a single decision. The head steward, a tall Rishan with an embroidered sash, lifted his hands. By decree, the offering is brought forth. The first tray held a small cup of dark broth that steamed faintly. The second held slices of translucent fruit arranged like stained glass. The third, Cade's attention snagged, held a porcelain plate with a single artful spiral of something pale and glossy, garnished with crimson threads. The dish-bearer carrying that third tray was young. Too young. His scales were polished, his eyes downcast, his posture rigid with memorized perfection. Sweat beaded at the edge of his jawline and caught the light. Cade watched his hands. They shook, just barely, but they shook. The procession advanced up the steps toward the dais. Cade had been trained for diplomacy, not paranoia, but he'd spent enough years on stations where air filters were bribed and water lines were compromised to understand the simplest rule of survival. When people insist something is safe, check twice. The hall's security protocol was a ballet of confidence. The taster had already eaten a ceremonial bite from the first 2 offerings. The steward had recited the oath. The guards had scanned for energy signatures. The priests had murmured blessings that made the crystal crown on Sorin's head glitter. Everything, everyone said, safe. Cade's gaze returned to the dish-bearer's hands. His fingers were too careful about not touching the plate's rim, not because it was hot. The steam wasn't that thick, because he didn't want his skin anywhere near it. Cade's mouth went dry. Poison came in 100 forms across 100 worlds. In Rishan culture, it was considered crude, an insult to the Queen's omniscience. A knife in the dark was at least honest. Poison was the weapon of cowards, they said, because it demanded secrecy. Which meant, of course, that if anyone used poison here, it would be someone who believed secrecy was guaranteed. A trusted hand. A familiar ritual. The third tray reached the final step. The dish-bearer lifted it toward the attendant whose job was to place it before the queen. The attendant, older, calm, bored by repetition, reached to accept it. Cade moved, not quickly by human standards, quickly by court standards. He stepped forward one step, then two, before his brain fully caught up with the decision. A spear angled across his path, humming warning. Cade raised both hands. "Hold!" The word came out sharp and flat. It cut across the hall in the one language everyone understood: interruption. Silence dropped so suddenly it felt physical. The steward's head turned. A dozen eyes locked onto Cade, some with astonishment, some with irritation, some with a hunger that smelled opportunity. The attendant froze mid-reach. The dish-bearer's pupils widened. Queen Soren's gaze shifted, slow as a planet's rotation, until it pinned Cade in place. Cade swallowed. His heart hammered a hard, stupid rhythm against his ribs. Every instinct screamed that he'd made a mistake in a room where mistakes were punished as examples. He forced his voice into something steadier. "Your Majesty," he said, and bowed, not too low, not too high. He'd studied the angle. "I request a verification." A ripple went through the advisors, a hissed whisper: verification, as if he'd asked to see the Queen's birth certificate. The steward's jaw tightened. "The offering has been cleared." "I believe one item has not been cleared properly," Cade said. The attendant's fingers hovered above the plate. The dish-bearer's arms trembled under the tray's weight. Queen Soren did not speak. Her silence was the kind that demanded confession. Cade's mind raced. He had no proof, only pattern recognition and a sick feeling in his gut. That wasn't enough in a court that worshipped certainty, so he reached for something else. "Who carried it?" he asked. The steward blinked. "The bearer is assigned. That is not your—" Cade's gaze locked onto the young servant. "Look at me." The dish-bearer flinched as if struck. His eyes darted to the steward, to the guards, to the queen. His throat moved. Cade softened his tone. "I won't touch you. I just need you to answer one question. Did you touch the rim of that plate at any point after it left the kitchen?" The servant's lips parted. The steward's voice snapped like a whip. "You will not interrogate royal staff." Cade didn't look away. He kept his eyes on the servant, made his face calm, gave him the only lifeline available in a hall full of predators. The possibility that someone was actually listening. The servant's eyes filled with panic. His shoulders rose, then almost imperceptibly his head shook. No, Cade felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. He turned to the queen, forcing himself to breathe. "Your Majesty, that dish-bearer avoided contact with the plate. That suggests dermal hazard. I request you allow an independent test before the dish reaches you." One of the advisors, a thick-scaled noble with scar patterns, clicked his teeth. "This is insolence." Another advisor leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Or theatrics." Cade braced for death. Queen Soren's voice, when it came, was quiet enough that the hall had to lean inward to hear it. "Human," she said. "Explain." Cade's tongue felt too big for his mouth. "Your protocols rely on trusted hands, on tradition. On the assumption that everyone involved fears you more than they desire change." He chose the next words carefully. "But poison is not a weapon for the brave. It is for the certain. Someone here is certain they will not be caught." The steward's tail twitched in outrage. "Your Majesty, the liaison speaks as if—" Queen Soren raised one clawed finger. The steward stopped mid-breath. Cade continued. "On my world, there's a phrase: trust but verify. You can punish me after if I'm wrong. But if I'm right, punishment won't undo what happens." A long pause. Then Queen Soren turned her head slightly. "Sir Vel," she said to a guard captain at her right, "take the plate." The captain stepped forward, lifted the dish with a gauntleted hand, and held it at arm's length as if it might bite. Queen Soren's eyes remained on Cade. "How will you test it, human man, without violating my hall?" Cade's mind snapped into problem-solving. He couldn't ask for human lab equipment. He couldn't demand access. He needed something already here. He pointed toward the ceremonial brazier that burned near the dais, its flame tinted blue by whatever minerals they fed it. "Heat volatilizes many toxins," he said. "If there is a contact agent the rim may emit. If it is ingested poison, a small sample can be exposed to the flame and observed for reaction. A murmur. The priests shifted uneasily. Fire testing sacred food would be a minor sacrilege. Queen Soren's expression did not change. "Do it!" The guard captain carried the plate to the brazier. With a dagger, he sliced a sliver from the glossy spiral and held it above the flame. At first, nothing happened. Then the sliver darkened not by cooking, but by crawling. A black sheen spread over it like oil, and the flame stuttered, coughing sparks. The air filled with a sharp, bitter odor that made Cade's eyes water. A priest recoiled, hissing a warding chant. The guard captain jerked his hand back, and the sliver fell into the brazier. The blue flame flared green, then went violently white for a heartbeat before collapsing into smoke. The hall erupted into sound. Shouts, hisses, a clatter of armor, spears leveled. The steward staggered as if punched, then tried to regain control. This is sabotage," Queen Soren stood. The movement was so sudden that the entire hall went still again. Even the smoke seemed to hesitate. Her voice cut through the chamber like a blade through cloth. "Silence!" Silence obeyed. She descended the dais one step, then another, her attendants fanning out like wings. Her gaze fixed on the plate now held away from her like a condemned thing. "Name," she said, not looking at the steward, not looking at the advisors, but at the dish-bearer. The young servant's knees buckled. He fell, tray clattering. "T. Tevrin," he stammered. "Tevrin of House Service Third." Queen Soren's eyes sharpened. "Who instructed you not to touch the rim?" Tevrin's mouth opened, closed, his entire body shook. The steward took a step forward, voice urgent. "Your Majesty, the boy is frightened. He may speak nonsense." Queen Soren turned her head, and the steward froze like prey beneath a predator's shadow. Cade felt a cold clarity settle over him. The steward was too invested, too loud, trying to manage the narrative, not proof but a direction. Cade spoke without raising his voice. "Tevrin," he said, "if you were told it was dangerous, you were used. If you tell her now, you may live." A gasp rippled. "May live" was not a phrase spoken casually in this hall. Tevrin's eyes squeezed shut. Then he blurted, voice cracking. "Master Steward Hollis, he said the glaze was reactive, that if I touched it, it would stain my scales and disgrace my house. He said to hold the tray only by the underside and not let my fingers near the rim." The steward, Hollis, went pale, his scales losing their luster. "For the record," one advisor murmured, "glaze does not stain scales." Hollis's mouth opened. "Your Majesty, this is absurd." Queen Soren's hand rose again, and the guards moved. Servel seized Hollis by both arms. Hollis struggled, but the guard captain was built like a fortress. Queen Soren stepped close enough that Hollis's breath fogged in the air between them. "You," she said softly, "have served in my hall for 17 cycles." Hollis's voice turned pleading. I have been loyal, I have. You have delivered my food," Queen Soren continued, 1,000 times. Hollis's eyes flicked just once toward the advisor's tier. Cade saw it. So did the queen. Her gaze followed his up to the cluster of nobles dressed in colors that whispered wealth. One of them, an elder with a chain of office shaped like interlocking claws, stood too still as if motion might draw attention. Queen Soren's voice rose, and now it held something like winter. "Who benefits from my death?" No one answered, because the answer was too large. The queen extended her hand. A servant placed a thin rod of crystal in her palm, an ancient symbol Cade knew of authority to command truth. She tapped it once on the stone floor. A low hum filled the chamber, vibrating through Cade's bones. "By right of the throne's scale," she said, "speak." Hollis's face contorted. Sweat ran down his neck. His mouth moved as if against his will. "House Kethrin," he rasped, voice strained. "They promised my clutch freedom. They promised my sister passage off-world. They said," he choked. "They said the queen would be replaced, a gentler rule, less iron." The elder with the claw chain, House Kethrin, stiffened. His eyes darted, calculating. Queen Soren's gaze snapped to him. "Kethrin, step forward." The elder lifted his chin, every inch the practiced statesman. Your Majesty, a servant's coerced confession is not evidence. A servant's confession under throne-scale compulsion is, the priest nearest the dais said quietly and sounded surprised to be agreeing. Catherine's nostrils flared. This is a human-s farce. This outsider has incited chaos in your sacred rites. Perhaps he introduced the toxin. A dozen heads turned. Suspicion tried to find purchase. Cade exhaled slowly. There it was, the counterstrike. If they could paint him as the saboteur, they could use the outrage to seize power for stability. Cade lifted his hands. I never touched the dish, he said, voice level. I have been visible on this floor since I entered the hall. If you have cameras, witnesses, or scent tracks, use them. Catherine's eyes narrowed. Humans are known to, Queen Sorin cut him off. Do not speak of a species you do not understand. The court went still again, startled not by the rebuke but by the tone. It wasn't anger, it was assessment. Queen Sorin turned toward Cade. Why did you intervene? Cade met her gaze and found unexpectedly that he could breathe under it. Because I recognized fear in the bearer, he said. Because my people have a long history of killing leaders with things that look like gifts. Because if you died here today, the resulting conflict would spill across the corridor worlds, and humans would be expected to choose sides. His honesty hung in the air, not noble, not flattering, practical. Queen Sorin studied him. You acted not for me, but for consequences. Cade didn't deny it. For consequences, yes, and for fairness. Tevrin didn't deserve to be a weapon. Neither did anyone who would suffer the war that follows an assassination. Queen Sorin's eyes softened by a fraction, so small it might have been imagination. You understand empires, she said. I understand systems, Cade replied. Empires are just systems with expensive furniture. A sound went through the hall that might have been a laugh if any of them remembered how. Queen Sorin turned back to Catherine. You claim this is farce, then you will welcome investigation. Catherine spread his hands. Investigation, of course, but surely your Majesty recognizes that your security protocols have been compromised. The human has demonstrated their weakness. For your protection, the Council must assume temporary custodianship until we control the throne, Cade translated silently. Queen Sorin's expression sharpened. You reach quickly for my crown. Catherine's voice oiled into reason. I reach for stability, the galaxy watches. If your hall can be infiltrated, your legitimacy. Legitimacy, Queen Sorin repeated, and there it was now, the blade behind the silk, is not granted by fear of outsiders. It is granted by the ability to remove rot without flinching. She gestured once. Servel's guards surged forward, not toward Hollis, already restrained, but toward the advisor's tier. Catherine's eyes widened. You cannot. I can, Queen Sorin said. Two guards seized Catherine. He resisted, suddenly less dignified and more animal. His claw chain clattered to the floor. The hall erupted into whispers again, but no one dared raise their voice. Queen Sorin looked at Hollis. You will be held, your clutch will be found. If they were threatened, I will know. Her gaze turned icy. If they were not, you will regret every breath you tried to buy with mine. Hollis sobbed once, a wet, broken sound. Queen Sorin turned to Tevrin. The young servant trembled like a leaf. You, she said, will not be punished for fear. Tevrin blinked, disbelieving. You will be punished, Queen Sorin continued, for silence. You knew enough to protect your own scales. Next time you will protect your realm. Tevrin bowed until his forehead pressed the stone. Yes, Majesty, Queen Sorin's gaze swept the hall. Hear this. The offering rite is suspended until my kitchens and my steward core are rebuilt from the bone outward. Any house that interferes will be stripped of rank and resource. She turned toward Cade again, and the chamber followed the motion like iron filings to a magnet. You, she said. Cade's muscles tightened. Now comes the price, he thought. Queen Sorin descended the last step and stood directly before him. Up close, her presence was overwhelming, not mystical, but intensely real. She smelled faintly of cold stone and something metallic, like rain on a roof. You disrupted my hall, she said. You embarrassed my stewards. You forced my guards to reveal uncertainty. Yes, Cade said, And you saved my life, she finished. Cade didn't speak. He didn't want to cheapen it by claiming intent he couldn't fully prove even to himself. Queen Sorin regarded him for a long moment. Then she said, "Your people build tools to measure what others assume." "That's one of our better habits," Cade said. "It is also dangerous," she said, and her eyes narrowed, "because it changes what power looks like." Cade held her gaze. Power that can't survive measurement isn't stable. A ripple passed through the advisors, those still unarrested. Some looked offended, some looked thoughtful. A few looked afraid for the first time. Queen Sorin's lips curved, not quite a smile, but the shape of one. "Then measurement you shall have. Human Cade Rurk, you will serve as auditor of offerings until my new protocols are written." The steward corps recoiled in horror. A human overseeing royal sustenance was sacrilege. Cade's mind raced. Auditor, that was access, that was influence, that was also a target painted bright red. He bowed. "If you command it." "I do," Queen Sorin said. Then, so only he could hear, she added, "And if you die because of it, human, I will consider it my failure." It was not comfort. It was a statement of responsibility. In her language, that might have been the closest thing to kindness. Cade straightened. The guards dragged Catherine toward the archway. The elder hissed venomous words over his shoulder. "This will fracture the houses. You cannot hold them all." Queen Sorin watched him go. "I have held them," she said, voice carrying, "since before you learned to coil your tongue around betrayal." Catherine vanished through the arch. The hall remained a field after lightning, stunned, smoking, rearranged. The priests began murmuring containment prayers for the poison plate. Servants hurried to clear the brazier's ash. Advisors clustered, voices low and urgent. Cade stood where he'd always stood, 3 steps back from the nobility, 1 step forward of the servants, except now the space felt different. Less like a cage, more like a crossroads. Tevrin was helped to his feet by another servant. As he passed Cade, his eyes flicked up, full of raw gratitude and terror. Cade gave him a small nod, the human equivalent of live and do better. Queen Sorin turned away, attendants closing around her, but she paused at the base of the dais and looked back at Cade one last time. "Human," she said, "your disruption has consequences. I will demand you meet them." Cade's throat tightened. "I will." She ascended the steps and took her seat again, queenly composure reassembled like armor. Yet something in the room had permanently shifted. The court had witnessed an outsider stop a ritual with nothing but observation and nerve. They had watched certainty crack. In that crack, new possibilities grew teeth. Cade exhaled slowly and finally allowed his hands to tremble, just a little behind his back where no one could call it weakness. He had stopped a poison. Now he had to survive the cure, because poison was never just chemistry. It was politics made liquid. And in the hall of 10,000 scales, politics always found another plate.